How do you see, what are some of the exciting areas in fintech where you imagine seeing growth in the next 3 to 5 years?
So I think couple of places is one is the whole DPI piece, right? The digital public infra. I think UPI 1.0 with just has the payment, right? The basic payment rails that I think has scaled wonderfully. I think the next step of innovations, at least in UPI, at least, will be the value added services on top of it, right?
Mm.
Um, Things that haven't really been solved yet, but things like international transactions on UPI. There was a concept called UPI plugin that was launched and I think is in the process of scaling. Other ways of, authentication right now is just pin based, so biometric stuff like that. So value added layers upon the rails that have sort of built and scaled. I think the same thing is happening in things like the account aggregator network, right? Uh, it'll sort of continue to evolve, the customer experience etc will get better, but that is another I think very exciting space. uh at least in fintech, the other two places I see actually will grow in the next couple of years is, things around privacy. Just with the whole DPDP Act coming in at some point get enforced, it's not really fintech, but I would classify it as fintech adjacent just because I think the biggest source of information about anybody is like their financial footprint, right? Which sits with banks. So if banks are involved, there's going to be some sort of fintech angle there. And I also think cross border is going to explode, right? And I'd break it down into two categories. One is your cross border flow in your current in the current system, right? Where you have your acquiring, issuing bank, the payment rails, you have your banks. But the other really exciting space that's blowing up is stable coins. So I think at least across this, right, your DPI, your value added services on top of DPI, the privacy space, cross border and stable coins are at least four areas I think are really going to blow up in the next few years.
But aren't these the areas where there is heavy regulatory kind of pressure? Don't you think that could be like a key headwind?
So it will. See, the thing is, I don't think regulations necessarily are bad. I actually think they're good because it's tougher for a company to operate in a gray area and not know what's going to come in the next day and immediately stop your growth, right? Or immediately shut down your business, which is what happened with Zest Money actually a few years ago. They were operating in this sort of gray area. And then the digital lending guidelines came in, and then immediately your Slice, Jupiter, Zest Monies of the world all had to see, okay, how do we restructure our business to make sure that we're not, really going against what these regulations are saying. So it will be slow. I'm not saying it won't be, but I think at least with in the case of UPI, a lot of the rails have already been laid, right? So a lot of the regulations have already come out. Now building on top of it is not super hard because the regulations now have already sort of laid a path on what you can do and what you can't do. And I think that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. So where I'm coming from is, if you look at especially the remittances, right? With the volatile kind of macro environment, uh, you know, most recently, what we got to know is, um, Trump has announced like 5% tax on NRA remittances. So that can come from anywhere, any day. Um, so how should one adapt to that as a company? And you think there's something that can be done to adapt to these kind of, spikes?
See, it's very tough to predict all of this. I think some things you can predict. So some things that are predictable are things that you can anyway look at the trends and make sure that hey, this is where the industry is going. So this is what I need to build. Some things like this, like Trump coming in and putting tariffs or saying hey, now I'm putting some sort of tax on remittance and things like that. It's very hard to guard against. I mean, my view here is you just sort of hope for the best, make sure that at least you have enough streams of business that can at least hold you through until all of this stuff sort of clears up. But I think that's something that at least a lot of fintechs are doing anyway, right? It's and at least fintech in India has evolved more into a full stack play. There are very few companies who have only one stream of business. Even if you look at cross border, yeah, sure, they may be doing cross border, but it won't be just focused on one corridor. It may be focused on, other corridors as well. So you're sort of hedging your bets there. But yeah, to answer your question, very hard to guard against stuff like this, honestly.
Makes sense. No, diversification, I think, is going to be one of the key strategies, right? Yeah.
I was thinking from perspective of people who are very new to these areas of growth, who may not have as much context in terms of what's really happening. So the growth areas that you have mentioned, can you break them down into like very layman terms for the audience in terms of for them to be able to appreciate and understand how fintech is evolving?
Right. So, uh, I mean, UPI, I think there's not too much explanation needed, but basically real-time account-to-account payments, right? Before this, there was no UPI is basically come in and taken the role of what cash or debit cards were doing, which was cash was very unstructured, very, very inconvenient, right? And the other way, at least, were debit cards, which were running on your MasterCard and Visa rails and very expensive, right, to the end user. The MDR at least was 2%, and that was passed down to the customer. What at least real time payments have come in, you've made it free, you've made it mobile first. Automatically, with the smartphone penetration, cheap internet, almost everybody who has a phone can now do digital payments. The issue with doing digital payments was never that people didn't want to be online, right? It was just that all of these, uh, you know, process problems of going to a bank, getting a debit card issued, remembering your PIN, all of that. The the place that you're paying at needing those POS machines, right? All of that was a very complicated, very, very tedious process. Now anybody has a phone can just scan a QR which has been printed from somewhere and just pin to the shop's wall and can immediately pay. So I think that what a UPI has done actually to make life very easy, I had to dumb it down, is just use what people already have and just made it very convenient, right? You've broken down the access barriers. Now, the thing with UPI is it's just another form of payment. What has not been solved on top of it, and you can equate it to something like cards, is, things like reward points, things like revolving credit that used to come with like a credit card. So, those are the things which will actually, in very layman's terms, think of almost taking the card experience, all the value added services that cards bring, and putting it on UPI rails. So, if you just look at UPI as a cash payment, what you would need on top of it is rewards. You need, like I said, revolving credit or a credit line, which hasn't really taken off yet, right? You'd need some sort of EMI. You can even have things like, alternate authentication. MasterCard and Visa are experimenting with biometric based passkey, stuff like that. So, taking up all of that, putting it on UPI, that's where, at least in a very layman's terms, that's how the ecosystem will actually evolve. That's how you'll shift all the or majority of the transactions that are happening on cards on UPI, right? Which has already started to happen. That's at least on the UPI front. Um, with cross-border and stablecoins, so it's a little more complex. So let me see how I can dumb it down. But when you're doing cross-border payments, right? I would right now, there's not really a solve, at least in the real-time payments world, for it. While our MPCI, which is the body that launched UPI, while we've done integrations with, I think, 7 odd countries with their equivalent of UPI, I think Singapore, Malaysia, UAE, all of that, it's still yet to be expanded across the globe. The reason for that is that it's not as easy as it seems. Essentially, if you look at UPI as rails that are connecting the merchant with the customer bank in very at its base. To do this at a global level, your real-time payments rail, which is UPI, has to be integrated with the country's equivalent, right? So if I look at Brazil, which has Pix, which is the biggest, maybe, which is a competitor to UPI in terms of scale, the Pix system would have to be integrated with UPI system, right? That's a mammoth task. It's really not that easy. So that'll take some time. Until that happens, the existing systems that we have for cross-border payments are basically your cards, because your MasterCard and Visa have built those global rails, right? Those still are pretty inefficient. The reason for that is because there are multiple systems that operate in silos. It can take a lot of time, right? So at every step, you have to do authentication. At every step, you have to do some sort of reconciliation. You have to do customer and merchant checks. So at least the end-to-end, the money transfer, the settlement cycle can be in days, right? It can take up to 7 days, at least 2-3 days. So it'll take. There'll also be multiple intermediaries, right? So let's say if I'm transferring money from bank X and I want it to maybe go to bank Y, to actually do that transfer, it's possible that my bank has not done an integration with that bank. So then we will have to find a bank in the middle that's connected to both banks. So the money, I will send it to that intermediary bank which has a connection with me and Bank Y. Then that money will go from, because they have the connection to Bank Y, then it will flow. So there's another step, right? You add another step, you add more process inefficiencies. So that's at least the way the current cross-border payment rails are structured. And there are ways for fintechs to come in and actually reduce these steps, right? And that is at least what folks, at least that is one thing that the PACB license is doing already, right? Before the PACB license came in, the bank had to sort of lead all this, own the merchant relationships and things like that. The PACB coming in puts more onus on the fintech, where the fintech can own those merchant relationships, the fintech can actually hold money and maybe own and innovate on more of the flows. It comes with more liability, but that's not really a bad thing. But the systemic issues remain, right? Where you still have multiple hops. The fintech may come in and reduce those hops, but at the core of it, you'll still have systems operating in silos. Stable coins will come in, and that's where the massive innovation is, and that's what I'm super excited about. Stable coins come in and essentially remove all of these hops. So if you think about blockchain, think of blockchain as a massive network, and every operating system is plugged into the same blockchain or the same network. So essentially, everybody is just a small system operating as part of a big system. When that happens, right, and also one key feature of blockchain is the distributed ledger technology, where when a transaction happens, that transaction is basically locked into an identical copy of the ledger that every system that's plugged into the blockchain has, right, in real time. Because of that, you don't have to keep doing reconciliation, you don't have to go back and forth, you don't have to keep doing verifications. Money transfer that would take days can now take seconds, because it can almost instantly be done because everybody is on the same network, right? So I don't know, I think it was sort of a long-winded answer, but I hope that made sense to you guys.